Joining me now are Jack Kingston, former Republican congressman from Georgia, and Don Beyer, current Democratic congressman from Virginia and former U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. Thank you both for joining us this evening to talk about this, a really interesting discussion that we've been having throughout the day. And I want to start off with you, Congressman Kingston, is whether or not the U.S. military should have announced this in the way that it did, the timetable, the plan that's going to go forward in Mosul. I've talked to several military officials today who believe that it's no surprise, that they know anyway that it's going to happen, but they're not exactly sure if it's going to compromise the mission. What do you think?
I don't know why you would tell your enemy what your plans are, particularly when it's doubtful that, or it's in doubt, because you only have 3,600 Iraqis at this point who are trained. You're going to need 25,000. Americans are limited to the 2,600 guys who will be doing the Joint Terminal Attack Control, kind of the JTACs, who stay behind. So it's doubtful. When we made our announcements in 2003 that we were invading Iraq, or in 2004 that we were going into Fallujah, we had the ability to do that. We had the Army, we had the forces on the ground, but we don't have that at this point. So announcing it ahead of time gives them an advantage, and I don't know why we would do that.
Congressman Beyer, there are two points that came out from discussions with military officials today. One, that they felt that in some way it was a signal to the Iraqi forces, look, don't worry about it. Whoever's going to be joining you, we got you. U.S. support, this is going to be a real tough battle to fight. The other thought here was that perhaps there would be some defections on ISIS's side because there was this heads up that this was going to go down in the spring. Do you buy either one of those arguments?
Yeah, and I think there's some history there. General McChrystal, back in Afghanistan in 2010, when he announced the plan to take back Helmand province, basically alerting the Taliban that we were coming and hoping that they would get much less resistance. It also gave hope to the civilian population. Remember, there's less than 2,000 ISIS fighters in Mosul right now. We're talking about 5 Iraqi brigades, up to 25,000 people. It will take some time, which is why Secretary Carter has said, the timing is uncertain. We won't go until we're ready. But we want ISIS to know that we are coming and that the people of Mosul will not have to live under ISIS domination forever.
Congressman Kingston, let's talk about the U.S. role here, the strategy in Iraq, because we do have advisors, intelligence officials who are on the ground in Iraq. The president has been very clear he doesn't want boots on the ground. He doesn't want combat troops to come back inside of Iraq. But essentially, when you've got fighting that's going on, if you're an intelligence person or an advisor or not, if somebody's attacking you, you're going to take on a combat role there, in some ways already turning it into a de facto combat mission. Do you ever see that it's appropriate to put U.S. boots on the ground in Iraq?
Absolutely. And if you're going to fight, you've got to fight to win. We cannot be half pregnant here. And that's one of the problems that we've had in the Middle East. We don't have clarity. We don't have an objective that we're going to say, here's our measure of success. Here's our definition of victory. We have to have that. I served on the Defense Committee for over 10 years, represented every branch of the military, particularly the 3rd Infantry, that has probably had the most action in the Middle East more than any other infantry division. And I heard it over and over again. Unfortunately, you have to have boots on the ground to coordinate your airstrikes. You have to have it to send the signals to the civilians. Here's the way out. Here's how you can join us. You have to, in this case, if you're trying to minimize collateral damage, you have to go house to house. You can't just do everything from the air. And to say that we're going to do that with the very Army, them up front, the Iraqis, these are the folks who a year ago put down their weapons and ran after we had spent billions of dollars in 10 years training them. So I do think that the case is there to have American boots on the ground, and that's a tough thing to say, but again, if you're going to fight, you got to win.
That is a very tough thing to say in light of the fact of how much was invested under President Bush to turn the region around, to turn Iraq around. He said he wanted this region to be, a freedom and democracy, and we are seeing the vacuum, the power vacuum that's happened, and now the mess to follow. So it certainly puts people in a difficult position to defend that and support that. I want both of you to stick around because we're going to talk about what understanding ISIS, how that could actually be a key in defeating them. We're also going to examine the so-called end of the world narrative that might be fueling this group's brutal march. Me again to discuss Jack Kingston, former Georgia Congressman, and Don Beyer, Virginia Congressman and former U.S. Ambassador to Switzerland. Thank you both there. Congressman Beyer, I want to start off with you. Does it matter if we understand what they want? ISIS, this terror group, when we're already seeing what they are capable of doing?
It does matter because we're going to need an all-of-the-above type strategy. We're clearly going to need those 5 Iraqi brigades, making a real meaningful difference in Mosul. We're clearly going to need to arm the Peshmerga and make sure that the Kurds can do what they can. The president talked the other day about economic opportunity, jobs, hopelessness. But, there's 70 to 90,000 social media messages a day coming out of ISIS. We've got to be able to counter the propaganda and the message those young people are getting. We have to do all of it together if we hope to succeed.
Congressman Kingston, we already know from the United Nations, the report coming out here, that they are raping children, they are selling them into slavery, they are killing, they are, the brutality of what is taking place in this part of the world is absolutely unbelievable. How is it that you get to people and the propaganda machine and stop what some people believe is an ideology, that they're going to get to the promised land in some way, the end of the world, the apocalypse, and have all that is good in the world and be on the right side? How do you even fight something like that in a propaganda way?
I do think you have to understand them, and I do think, and I hope somebody in the White House reads Graham Wood's articles in The Atlantic and they watch the interview that you had with him today. The reality is the president is still in denial that they do not have a religious background, if you will, a belief system that is religious. It might be a twisted form of Islam. We'll all agree on that. But the reality is they believe that they are on the side of good against evil. And they believe that when they recruit people and recruits sign up, that they are fighting on the right side of God or Allah or whatever. And the reality is the only way you can break that spirit is to defeat them. You have to have victories, and you have to show, look, they're not expanding anymore. That's why taking Mosul is important, but also to counterattack them. And it's interesting, the president doesn't want to give them their religious due because he believes that that will trigger some kind of a mass world recruitment. But yet when he says we're going to go into Mosul, that's going to be the same thing. So, you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't, if you're going to play around with this religious label. But you got to go in there and break their spirit, because if you don't, they believe that Allah is on their side and that victory belongs to them.
Congressman Beyer, I see you are shaking your head. Jump in, weigh in, if you will, for the last point here.
I just don't think that's fair to the president. What he's saying is that this isn't a war against Islam. It's clearly a war against ISIS, and I think he clearly understands that ISIS has these 1,000-year-old archaic religious ideas. What the president is trying to point out is that the great victims of ISIS have been Muslims, and that we're going to need most of the Muslim world, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, those fighters from Syria and Iraq, if we're going to beat ISIS.
But on the other hand, and Don, I'm in agreement with you, most of the victims have been Muslims, but the reality is that their own leadership says, find an infidel, crush his head with a rock, poison him, and destroy his crops. That's the kind of rhetoric they say, followed up by, we are going to conquer Rome and break your crosses. And then you have...
that's not Islam, Jack.
But the president is saying that they're not religious. My point is they believe that they are religious. And so the president can declare what he wants, but in the fight for good and evil, they believe that they are on God's side. That's why it's important. And so I'm not saying that, this is Islam, but it is a twisted form in which they have embraced.
Yeah, and I agree. I just don't think it's fair to the president to say that he doesn't realize the religious underpinnings of ISIS. Clearly he does. He just wants to make sure that we're not declaring war on Islam, that we're declaring war on the terrorists themselves.
All right. I've got to leave it there. You both had your say. We're running out of time. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thanks a lot.
We really appreciate it. We'll have you back. We'll be right back.